Trade deadline, it's as we sit here in this moment on Thursday, it is 3 weeks from today. February 10th is the NBA trade deadline, B. Rob, and I know you know that, but for anyone out there that just knows it's coming up and doesn't know the exact date, put it on the calendar, circle it, and the countdown begins. Brad Stevens, as Ime Udoka has said, he's working the phone constantly, before games, after games, probably during games. The man is staying very, very busy, and it's going to be very interesting to see, obviously, what he does with his first trade deadline as a president of basketball operations. The reporting out there, whether from you, whether from your colleagues here in Boston, whether from national guys like Adrian Wojnarowski, it's, you have untouchables. You have guys who are definitively not moving, at least in season. Off season, who the hell knows? But right now, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Robert Williams, they're not going anywhere. But beyond that, the Celtics appear to be gauging value on everybody else, whether it's Al Horford and his contract, of course, Josh Richardson, Dennis Schroeder, who I feel like it's inevitable that he winds up moving somewhere. And even Marcus Smart is in this conversation right now, which, I know we love him. We trust him. He's a heart and soul. He's a glue guy. He's a de facto captain since Ime decided not to name real captains. A lot of people are very, very high on Marcus Smart. We on this show are very high on Marcus Smart, but we're now at a point, even after his big payday, that he finds himself here in this mix to potentially be on the move. What do you think, just overarching thoughts, and then we'll get more specific. What do you think is likely to happen here in the next few weeks?
I think that one of those guys you mentioned, one of those veterans gets moved. I think there's enough smoke out there, and the fact of where this team has been for a year and a half now, I think you have to realize that this mix is not going to be something you want to build upon for next season. Like, are there pieces here that work? Yeah, but I think there's some redundancy in a lot of these pieces that are here, and there are other needs on the roster that need to be filled. It may not be adequately filled by the youth or, other areas that you can use in the offseason, whether it's free agency or the mid-level exception stuff. You're not going to be able to adequately fill them and get this team back to a contending level in the Eastern Conference. So when you do that, you have to figure out here, okay, what can I get for these guys? Can we potentially sell high on Josh Richardson when he's having a nice bounce back year and maybe some contender thinks he can put them over the top and we get a little more than we thought for him? Or would someone value someone like Smart, who obviously is locked up long-term there? So you have like some certainty for any team that trades for him. They're like, hey, this is a guy that we can have that can either fortify our bench or just be a good fifth starter and obviously a tremendous defensive presence for years to come. And then even Horford, my guess with him, he'd be the most unlikely to go at this point from what I'm hearing, just because that salary is really big and only teams that have a chance of winning now are going to want him. And none of them really have the pieces to match salaries well enough to make that kind of a deal. But everyone else on that list, whether it's Richardson, Smart, Schroeder, or any of Boston's younger pieces that aren't playing as much, whether it's Pritchard, Langford, etc., those guys are going to continue to be talked about, and they should be, because everything should be on the table for this team right now, since what's working obviously is nothing in terms of being a contender.
If I could keep going, but I'll take a breath.
No, I mean, we'll get into the bowl stuff later, where we want to go with that. But I've always kind of had this particular point, and I think maybe recently the point has been lessened to a degree because he has been playing a little bit better, at least on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, you're going to live and die with the gambling of Dennis Schroeder, very similar to how like Rondo used to gamble a little bit, being a smaller, quicker guard. You try and go for those quick steals. Sometimes you get them and you get a fast break layup. Sometimes you blow it and there's a layup. So it happens. But with Schroeder, this was last week, and I've kind of texted Adam about this back and forth, repeatedly throughout the past couple weeks. I just don't understand what market there is for Dennis Schroeder, other than the fact that he's an expiring contract on a very cheap deal. I'm not sure how much value that has around the rest of the league. What have you been able to find out in terms of where Schroeder, or maybe it's no, they're just praying that there's someone up there that will take him off their hands and open up more time for Payton Pritchard, who I believe deserves more playing time, because every time he touches the ball, it seems like things go much better. But what is your assessment, Brian, in terms of where the rest of the league is at with a guy like Dennis Schroeder, who I don't think has a ton of trade value really at all, other than an expiring contract?
Yeah, I mean, I think your suspicions are dead on from what I mean. I mean, there's a reason why he was available for $7 million this offseason. And that's because he's a useful player, but point guard around a league is a very deep position. And if you look around playoff teams in both conferences, most teams are very much set at that position or have guys that are either better than Schroeder or they're just more invested in developing than Schroeder. And so you look at that, and then you look at rebuilding teams, and it's like, well, what do you want to do with Dennis Schroeder? Like, you're not going to have interest on him on a rental. So that does, like, pretty much shrink his market a lot. And I think, a pair of second round picks, like, is, I think, realistically what maybe the best offer the Celtics get, if that. If in all honesty, I mean, Schroeder is playing better. The offensive numbers he's putting up as a starter are quite drastically better than what he is all coming off the bench. So how that factors into things going forward, we'll be very curious. But if I'm the Celtics, and that's why I think gauging value on everyone could say, okay, say you get a solid offer for Smart, and maybe you can retain Schroeder as a starter next year because he wants to play at a far cheaper number. Is that the route they will go? I don't know. I don't know if they're sold on him as a long-term answer there potentially, but if you get a good offer for Smart, right? I'm not right. I think right, but if you can spend some of that money in other parts of the roster and get something good back for Smart, then it might start to like make sense to do something like that. So I think again, the odds are far more likely that Schroeder is dealt than any of those guys on that list. But it doesn't surprise me to know that the Celtics are kind of checking in on all those things just to see, what potential buttons they could push here to start building down the road in whatever direction they do to build around the Jays.
Well, we'll find out in the days and weeks to come, obviously, what's real, what's due diligence. You'll have reports, Woj and Shams and everybody else. We'll find out. We'll get an idea of, whether when there's smoke, there's fire versus, it's just talking heads on the radio, on TV, or on the internet, having a little bit of fun on Twitter. But, I don't know. The Dennis Schroeder thing is just so interesting because you could make a case, you could look at this in a lot of different ways. You could make a case that they have a higher ceiling just again this year with a guy like Schroeder versus not. Some would make the case otherwise because of obviously the liabilities that Evan talked about. You could argue for him being the starter even when Smart returns, and Smart coming off the bench. He certainly thrived under Brad Stevens as a sixth man before becoming this team starter. Obviously, in many ways, Smart is more of a playmaker. Schroeder is more of a guy who's got, an offensive touch. We've seen it recently with the opportunity. But I come back to this kind of core thing, which we've been talking about in this show a ton throughout the season, which is you're not going anywhere this year. You're not, you're whatever your ceiling is this year. And I do believe it's playoffs. Maybe it's win a round, go out in the second round. You're not a contender. You're not winning a championship this season, barring something wildly drastic happening in terms of an addition or, injuries and the perfect matchups or whatever else. It would be a real lightning in a bottle kind of thing. So if we operate with that mindset, you're thinking about getting under the luxury tax. You're thinking about freeing up opportunity and development. And I don't think it's a development season per se. And I've had back and forth with people on Twitter about that, but I do think that there is value in, we saw it when Schroeder was out, when others have been out. You talked about how hard this team's been hit by COVID injuries and whatever else. Peyton Pritchard's a guy who should be playing, and Peyton Pritchard and Romeo Langford and Aaron Nesmith, all these guys, like, you got to find out if you have anything there. You need to really see if you have anything there. In order to do that, it's counterintuitive, I know, to a lot of the stuff we said throughout the offseason when we were praising Brad Stevens for adding veterans, but it hasn't totally worked out. And so you almost have to pivot and say, okay, what's our priority right now? And I think it has to be to see what the young guys have. And so, if the best thing that you just talked about if the best thing you can get for Dennis Schroeder is a couple of second round picks and unloading a $6 million salary, and Peyton Pritchard and these guys end up playing more as a result, I think you do that. I think it's a no-brainer to do that.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a path they need to consider strongly, whether it's not just Schroeder, but like Enes Freedom, another guy who is here in your future. No, he's a guy that
at least he's making pennies.
The fact that he's in my present is really troublesome to me, B Rob. I can't do Cantor or Freedom minutes anymore than we are.
Right.
I wish they didn't exist. I wish to just give them to Bruno Fernando, for crying out loud. I would rather, at least the energy is fun to watch, and Bruno is, a guy that'll try a little bit better on defense. I just can't do it Freedom minutes anymore. I'm all set. That ship sailed a long time ago.
Right. Especially against on Wednesday night against a Charlotte team that is just playing totally small. So he's just totally exposed defensively when he's out there against that kind of a group.
Watching him try and like drop on pick and roll coverage, leaving like Terry Rozier a 10-foot runway to line up that 3-point shot. I was like, well, like, what are we doing here? Like, you just like, I know you're going to get roasted if he goes by you, but you at least have to attempt to challenge the shot. I mean, at least try. Look, the sooner that they get freedom off the team, the better in my particular capacity.
Yeah. I mean, just getting a useful big, a playable big, I should say, in that spot for like that at least is young enough where he might be building up to something. Just find the best G League center that out there. Like that's probably a better bet for your, both the present and the future right now than, I mean, I don't hate having freedom on the roster entirely, but when he's your only playable big alternative, when, Robb or Al is out, like that is not a good solution for how this team wants to play. If they want to be a defensive first team, get some defensive first players in that slot, because Freedom's not giving you much offensively regardless, and we don't know what the defense is.
I'd rather see Larry Sanders out there, who has not played basketball in I don't know how many years now, than watch Enes Freedom out there try and guard pick and roll. And I don't know what kind of shape Larry Sanders is in, but I'd rather watch that because at least I know, they tried something a little different. Again, I like the idea of the best G League center out there. There's this report about potentially checking on Jalen Smith out with Phoenix. I can't believe that that's being floated out there. I love that idea, and that's a way to take advantage of a team like Phoenix, whose owner tends to be on the cheaper side of things. Like DeAndre Ayton's sitting there waiting for a contract extension that I'm not quite sure he's going to get from Phoenix at this point. I mean, I think probably at the end of the deal, I think at the end of the day they'll probably get it done, but it's not a total guarantee. Meanwhile, Jalen Smith, and while they've had some injury, and COVID issues out in Phoenix, like has played pretty well. And is a lottery pick that is, as we talk about all the time, development's not always linear. You're not always going to get better incrementally, right? Jalen Smith's a guy that I would take a chance on. And my goodness, what an upgrade over Enes Freedom just by checking in on that. So, I mean, there are things out there where you can maybe take advantage of something like that. I mean, I know it's almost, getting anybody from Sacramento sort of a risky proposal, but like, I would rather go out and try and see what Marvin Bagley can do than watch Enes Freedom. Like I've just had enough.
Well, I love Bagley. I'd happily take Bagley, but dealing with what they've got currently, Robb, and just for a moment, going back to the Schroeder thing, like moving Freedom, moving Richardson, moving Horford in theory, moving Smart, even like these are options, but I don't know that any of them is necessarily for Brad Stevens a priority. Is moving Dennis Schroeder a priority, do you think?
A priority? I don't think so. I think the fact they got down to just $2 million above the tax right now, so they can kind of get all the way there without, moving a significant piece of salary. I think that makes moving him not a priority at all. Like it's a priority if you can get something good for him, if you can get like solid value, and I do think playing Peyton Pritchard more is a priority for them in the second half of the season, now that he's gotten out of the slump that he was, mirrored in November. At the same time, I'm not convinced that Brad Stevens is like set to give up on this season, like just based on how his mindset is as a coach. Like he was never, from what I heard, like especially early when he just got hired, he was very much an advocate for like, hey, don't blow things up in the middle of the season on me. Like, and that's, especially when the year they, turned things around in the second half, they got Isaiah and stuff like that. They could have sold a lot more in that year. And he was not one of that. He was like, no, like we need to start something. We need to start building something here. So I don't know if he's going to take a similar path with Ime here, thinking, hey, we've had a lot of adversity here in the first half of the season. Are the metrics, the analytics say that we're better than our record shows based on how much we have absolutely crapped the bed in these fourth quarters. Yeah. Now, whether that's a result of the players or whether that's a result of bad luck, it depends on who you talk to. They do have a track record there of that being more on the players based on the fact that last year they weren't good in that area either. But I could definitely see Brad Stevens saying, hey, like, I don't want, if we're just getting a second round pick for Dennis Schroeder, like, I'll just keep him. Like, and see, maybe things go right. Maybe Jason Tatum gets back to like the guy we saw last year, as opposed to the guy who was really struggled in the first half of the season with his shot. And maybe we get the right draw in the playoffs and we can let Ime Udoka start building something here. And so I don't think that necessarily is the right path, but I think that's certainly a path that they could take based on just how Brad thinks as a coach. We'll see if he thinks that way as an executive.
Recognizing that Brad did trade Kemba Walker, who by all accounts is like the nicest person to walk planet Earth next to Mother Teresa and Gandhi. Does he have a stomach for dealing Marcus Smart? I mean, do you really
big question?
He does?
Oof. I think he does, but it's going to have to be for like something, and I bet it's for a deal that they don't get. I'll say that, like an offer they don't get. Mm-hmm. Like I don't think he's gonna, if he's like on the fence about it, my inclination is that he'd be, ready to keep him over that. But I mean, you do wonder still, like, I mean, no one will say about it, but you think back to Smart's comments publicly back in the beginning of the season where he kind of threw Jalen and Jason under the bus. Mm-hmm. Everything obviously seems fine since then, but you wonder just in terms of if that it does have a underlying impact on just the relationship between those guys that have been, up and down over the years. And yeah, I do honestly think that if the right thing's coming out, they do it. Because I know for a fact that like last season, they had serious talks to him about him then too. And they obviously didn't pull the trigger on anything, but that's something whether it's that or whether it's Lonzo Ball, this and sign and trade stuff in the offseason. Like he's not he certainly hasn't been untouchable for a while now. It's just a matter of, is something good enough there for them to bite on?
Mentioning Lonzo now that he's down, by the way, with the injury and the Bulls are just it's too bad because they're such a fun team to watch, but they're just getting ravaged right now. Could that be a spot for Schroeder?
Yeah, I actually thought the same thing when I saw it today. Like, oh, he's out for like a month and a half right now. Like, I wonder if they really want to push for it right now. And I'm sure they don't want to lean on Lonzo too hard when he gets back from that kind of injury. Like if that brings them into a market for, a point guard rental like Schroeder. So yeah, that certainly might be a place to look that you wouldn't think would be there, even a week ago.